Introduce Rob to you. Rob comes from the Netherlands, and I know only one person from the Netherlands by now two. Do you know Mark Smalley, by the way? Do you know?
Yeah, I know him.
Yeah, he was last year here and this summer. And who of you, raise your hands, who was last year and who met Mark Smalley from the Netherlands? Oh, wait. Maybe he will join us next time, but awesome person. Give my regards to him. And we have lack of time. My introduction will be short. We will speak about blueprint. About, yes. Please.
Yeah, thank you. Let's see, we still have 1 minute to go, right? I can wait maybe a few seconds. That's okay. Or we can start. Okay, welcome to this presentation about DevOps blueprint for a tool chain. Now, a few weeks ago, I talked with the CIO of a large international bank, and they were in about 5 years in the DevOps journey. And after those 5 years, they suddenly realized that they had increased complexity of the entire DevOps delivery pipeline, about monitoring, the testing, security, everything together. And they realized that they now had to do a lot of work to basically standardize the way of working, creating more integrated workflows. And they said, if we had a blueprint to start off with, to start 5 years ago, having a good blueprint, they should have been much further in their journey than they are now. So that's why I want to focus today on why is a blueprint very important to start your DevOps journey. Now, be aware, this blueprint can be very complex. Let me see. Let's see the next slide. No, it's not working. And because a DevOps blueprint is much more than just a CI/CD pipeline. It's much more than just, let's say, DevOps in general. Because this is about managing your entire digital service portfolio, from idea to production and much more. Security, risk, compliance, the cost, and so on. So managing the entire digital workflow is complex. And that's why I start with a warning, because I will introduce some complexity, showing you everything, all the capabilities you need to run a digital organization. And it is complex, but you need to understand the complexity before you can simplify it in your own organization. Short words from myself. My background is both business and IT. So I think that's a good combination, looking at how you run a business, processes, and information technology. I started as a developer at Capgemini, and later on I moved more into the DevOps automation, the automation of developing, testing, monitoring, security as well, financial management. So looking at all the different aspects. I've been working a long time at Shell, building an integrated IT management pipeline, which we call there IT for IT, which is the IT you need to run IT. And that's also a standard in the market now, IT for IT from the Open Group, and I'm chair of that forum of the Open Group to develop this standard further. So I'm also briefly introducing IT for IT with you as well. So typically I use practices such as DevOps, Agile, ITIL is still used in many larger organizations for the process like incident and change management, and then IT for IT. So let me briefly show you the agenda for today, the storyboard. So one, I would like to set the scene. Why is IT management and the digital pipeline so complex? And how can we simplify that? Then introducing a high-level blueprint of your DevOps tool chain. Then moving into the details, what are the building blocks you need to run an efficient IT organization from an end-to-end perspective? The full DevOps tool chain, which is much more than, as I said before, than just the CI/CD pipeline. And then explore some of the integration scenarios. So hopefully after this session you will learn the secrets of what you need to know about running a complete end-to-end digital pipeline. Now, setting the scene. This is typically a DevOps dilemma that many organizations are facing. So organizations that are in a few years of the DevOps journey, they face a number of challenges. The first thing that works fine is organize around products and teams, and they deliver fast. So people can deliver fast. But there's not one team, it's a lot of teams, and all the teams work fast. They have a lot of work item in their backlogs, and they deliver fast. So it looks like we're doing a very great job here. All the teams deliver frequently new features, But the business is still wondering, okay, all the teams are very busy, but when do I get my feature that I needed? Because the communication with the business is not that efficient. So what you see in an organization that has a fully DevOps operating model, you see that the total, although all the teams work very efficient and fast, the total organization is not that fast anymore. Strategic change in IT organization is slowing down. If the business wants a strategic new product to be delivered in the market, it now takes more time because they need to collaborate with all the teams. Suddenly, things slow down on the enterprise level. On the enterprise level, you get complexity because every team selects their own technologies because they like engineering. The costs go up. There is typically an organization of a significant size has not just 100 products. They have 200, 300, 400 different applications or products with many teams. And suddenly the costs go up. There's less transparency because somehow each team has set up Jira in their own way and there's no transparency to the business, what's actually delivered, what value is delivered. And there is some challenges with compliancy and risk. So what organizations are now realizing, if you really use DevOps at scale, you need to significantly think about how do we collaborate with all the teams together. And do we have a common blueprint, a common set of automation that we can share? Now, why is it so important to have a shared delivery platform for digital? One, of course, IT is becoming more important, you know that, for the business. But at the same time, we have more and more components we need to manage in our IT organization. The IT landscape is only increasing in complexity. We've got more APIs, more cloud resources, more containers, more than we ever had in the past. We got more vendors we work with. We don't do everything ourselves, but we work with the vendor ecosystem. We got more parties involved in our digital ecosystem, so the number of vendors we integrate and work with is increasing as well. We got more changes to manage due to continuous delivery, patch management. The frequency of change is only going up. We got more security threats and events that we need to process. They will not go down. We got more security issues and challenges out there. And if we don't design secure by design, we run in a lot of issues in the operations. At the same time, compliancy and regulatory requirements go up. Yeah, we need to be compliant. And in Europe, for example, you have GDPR. So you need to know what data do you manage in each application and what is the classification of that. So it will only make IT more complex because of all these policies and compliance you need to adhere to. There's more data in the IT organization. And there is something we're not very good at in IT is managing data. We got more build logs, test logs, monitoring data than before, and it's still fragmented and we cannot get the insight of that data. Also, what is often forgotten in DevOps, service requests. Those are the requests our business and end users are standardized in the catalog. People want to have access to an application or they want to change something, not come from a code perspective, just they want something to be loaded in the application or run a report, or just if somebody joins the organization, it needs an email address, a laptop, access, and so on. There's a lot of growing number of service requests in the IT organization, and the DevOps teams need to automate those as well, which is often forgotten. Basically all those operational day 2 operations activities. And I said before, this dependency between applications and products is only increasing. So we got more complexity there, and we need to design that and manage that. And at the same time, right, it's an open door. We need to deliver faster, better, cheaper, more reduce the risk. And as a result, we really need to think differently, looking at this complexity. How do we design, build, and test, and operate our solutions? And we need a sort of digital backbone, what they call, is have a standard way of introducing new products and services and automate more. Now, to show you the complexity, because this is just simplified an IT management landscape, managing DevOps or managing digital services, I must say, throughout the enterprise is pretty complex. This is just a simplification of all the things you need from an automation perspective and data perspective. So, for example, portfolio backlog. It's an organization that have a few hundred products or maybe 1,000 applications. They need to manage their portfolio across the different teams. Typically, we're not very good at publishing our roadmaps to the business and collectively work with different teams together. We have our architectural tools where we manage the architecture. Architecture typically has their own tools. They're not very well integrated. But it is still important for managing the digital enterprise. Of course, we know our backlogs in Jira and Azure DevOps. We have our content management, because we don't like to document, right? As developers or operations people, we don't like documentation. But somehow we still need to document how a system is working. And the stories in a backlog tool doesn't tell that. Although it's called a story, but it doesn't really tell the story. So somehow, like, we use Confluence or wikis to store some information. Now, continuing that, of course, we have our source code, our CI/CD pipeline, like a GitLab, or Azure DevOps, or Jenkins, code quality, build, artifact repository, test management, deployment. Deployment tools in the market, we have plenty of deployment tools, right? We have Ansible, but also Chef and Puppet. We use ARM templates for Azure. So typically, there's many different deployment tools that an organization is using for the application provisioning as well as for infrastructure provisioning. And still, we have plenty of deployment tools, but if we want to change firewall rules, we still have to fill in a form, and it's not fully automated. There is still to be done there. Monitoring is a space where is complexity. We have a lot of different monitoring tools out there for, let's say, Nagios, Prometheus, looking at the infrastructure and the applications, like application performance monitoring, synthetic transaction to simulate end-user behavior, security monitoring and so on, log analytics like an Elk or a Splunk. But we have a lot of monitoring tools, but you also get the data together in an integrated, let's call it an AOps platform, to show what's actually going on in the landscape. That's typically missing. We have a service management system where we have the incident, the CMDB, self-service for people to request services, our collaboration tools, and so on. Now, what I show here is just the complexity we have, and it will not go down, because all the tools that are here, coming with their own data, come with their own way of working, and the real challenge is to make the journey integrated, because all these tools do a part of the entire work, but how do you integrate that, which is challenging. And it becomes more challenging because a Java pipeline uses different components, partially, than a .NET or a SaaS application or SAP, right? So the complexity is only more increasingly more complex if you look at this landscape. Now, this is how we manage IT today, really. I'm typically working at larger organizations that typically have, let's say, 500 or more applications or products. And from the outside, they believe that they run IT very efficiently, and often that is the case. They're in the DevOps journey, but if they really zoom in what they're actually using, it's a complex network ecosystem of tools, practices, and data. And the challenge that they're now facing is, we got all the tools there, and some of the teams are very advanced. They have already a fully automated CI/CD pipeline, but if you look at an organization that has 100 products or more, only a few of them have really integrated pipeline. The test automation is partially integrated with the backlog. There's no automatic defect tracking. We still have deployment, but we still have a lot of manual activities. One of the challenges is that this is an actually complex engineering landscape, but you need to engineer this as well. You need to design and build this total ecosystem. And most organizations, they believe that they're doing the right thing. So typically what's happening, many organizations are continuously tweaking and tuning this landscape. So it's already complex, but what's happening, any organization is continuously changing it. So we're working on the CI/CD pipeline, we're working on self-service portals, so the business users can request services, maybe modifying, let's say, request an access to an infrastructure component. The CMDB, who has a good CMDB, configuration database? Nobody has that, right? It's never up to date, but we still have people believing that we should set up a CMDB with discovery and we'll solve everything. Test management, cloud management, of course, how do we manage the Azure and Amazon cloud? And so there's initiatives there enough. But what typically is missing is a blueprint and a plan how everything should be connected. And that's what I want to talk today about. How do you create a blueprint of how should my digital pipeline be connected? Because it's a complex environment out here. And of course, there's one option. What you could do is continue the way you've done it. And of course, every team does it their own way, and it's very good. But if you want to do it at scale, it is challenging. So you need a blueprint or a kind of high-level architecture of how you need to engineer your entire DevOps tool chain. It's not just the tools, right? It's also about the way of working and your data that you use. I will come to that later. If you don't have a good architecture in place for your tool chain, this is what happens, right? It doesn't scale or it breaks down, and it doesn't really connect. So we need to work and co-create with multiple teams together an integrated pipeline. And maybe the word pipeline is not even the right word. It's a network ecosystem of tools that work together and share data. So let's have a look at this DevOps reference architecture. Now, here we got some complexity here, complex slides. So I don't want to discourage you here, but this picture just is an illustration of the IT for IT standard, and I'll provide some links to it that you find out where you can find out more information. But this is basically the standard where we're talking about is trying to say what are the key building blocks I need to run an efficient digital organization. So it defines the capabilities, the building blocks, what data do I need, and how do I integrate it all to deliver faster, better, and cheaper. And that's organized in a number of building blocks, but it's also organized in a number of value streams. Now we'll go through these value streams in a little bit more detail. But you have to understand this is bigger than just the traditional DevOps pipeline that typically is focusing on a subset of what you need to run a digital organization. Now, let me briefly introduce the value streams. So IT for IT consists of 4 value streams. And those 4 value streams basically show your IT delivery workflow. The first one is strategy to portfolio. That is managing the portfolio of products you have. A typical organization has maybe 100, 200, 300,000 different applications and products. So here you manage your portfolio and decide what is the roadmap, where do you want to invest in. Business comes with new demands and ideas, but at the same time I need to innovate and my portfolio. Requirement to deploy is basically about the continuous delivery pipeline itself. It's getting new features in, stories, develop them, test them, deploy them. But once you deploy something in production, you still have something more to do, request to fulfill. That's all about repetitive requests that the business and IT can raise to the organization. For example, an end user wants now access to a business application or wants to load data, all the repetitive things. But it could also be adding capacity, removing capacity. All those day-to-day operational tasks. It's all about request to fulfill. Automate all those frequently recurring tasks, spinning up an environment, shutting it down, adding capacity. It's nothing to do with changing the production configuration, but more adding or changing how resources are configured, parameterize them. And then the detect to correct is all about monitoring and proactively detect an issue before the business is impacted. So let me start with requirement to deploy, which is organized around a value stream. And why do we need to organize around a value stream of work? That is because we want to integrate capabilities. It's integrating your backlog, your development, your testing, your deployment, and have an integrated workflow there. Now, this is a simplified picture, right? This is only showing you, so what is typically in the requirement to deploy? There's a product and a team backlog where we manage our stories. We do the development and design. We do the build and integration with the CI/CD pipeline, like a Jenkins or Azure DevOps. We do the testing and make sure that if something is not according to the specification, we raise a defect. And this is our continuous integration, continuous delivery pipeline, which is tightly integrated into the request to fulfill, where we do the fulfillment of standardized products and services. It's the actual deployment of the infrastructure, the actual deployment of the application. So we have a full range of different products there to do the provisioning. But there's more in request to fulfill. But let's go to detect to correct first. So when do we deploy something? Typically, we need to also deploy monitoring. And once we have monitoring in place, we detect events, we have incidents. And somehow, if something is failing in production, we might need to fix it and put it back into the team backlog to fix it, so we have a closed loop. Because in production, we don't change anything, right? It's basically zero change. We only change it through there's a new release or through request to fulfill. It's immutable infrastructure. Security as well. But the request to fulfill, a little bit more detail, there is more in DevOps that people typically tend to forget. We have business, right? And business consuming our services. How does the business consume our services? They want to request access, for example. So we have a service catalog published through a portal where end users and business can request access to a service or modify, or maybe through an API, add additional capacity, all things. So we need to request those, or fulfill those requests through an automated way. We have usage and showback. Once you deploy something, you want to monitor the usage, turn things on and off when they're needed anymore. So there's a lot of automation here that we typically forget in the DevOps scenario. And then strategy portfolio, as I mentioned, is about managing the portfolio of services, the architecture, the portfolio backlog. Now, typically what we miss in many organizations is a product portfolio. So imagine an organization of a significant size, as I mentioned, 200, 300 products. most organizations don't have a register. What are our products? Who is the owner, like a product owner? What are the teams working on it? We lack that visibility. But in strategy to portfolio, basically you have to balance all those products and services and say, how well are they supporting the business? What is the roadmap? Where do I need to invest in? Which is much a broader perspective than an individual team or a product owner works on his own product. Here you need to look at the collection of work, looking at the portfolio backlog and working with the business on what are the strategic themes where we need to work on. This is typically in scaled agile framework on the portfolio level with portfolio epics. But there is more. Think about IT financial management. For many organizations, managing the cost of IT is still important because we never have enough resources to build everything we want. So it's important to understand what are the budgets and costs associated with the product. Do we utilize our infrastructure and can we basically do the charge back to the business so people understand this is what it costs and this is the value you create. Risk management, typically a challenge now, and I can continue. Does it scare you already a bit, this complexity? But there's nothing on this picture where you could say, I don't need that in my organization, because it's typically needed if you are running at scale. If you have one application, you could argue you can eliminate some of that. If you have 2, 3, but if you have 100 applications, 200 applications, it will be challenging. And the key aspect that I want to show here is also the product backbone, which is basically your consistent set of administration with what are the products and services you deliver and how does all the work I do in IT is connected to that. Now, let me show you as an example, in this IT delivery pipeline, there are many different scenarios. Like one of the scenarios is a journey of somebody has an idea and we need to get something in production. So that's kind of a workflow you typically have where there's a new demand for a new product, let's say. So we need to decide whether we're going to invest in this product, then we need to develop it, maybe do a prototype, test it, select a technology platform, and so on and so on. This is already a complex journey. But this is just one scenario, because it's not enough to say, I got something in production, but now we need to manage it and continuously improve it. So there are other flows of work in IT organization. Typically, we have an incident or an issue detected by monitoring, and we want to fix it, preferably automated, but it could be like a performance issue, and we fix it by temporarily adding additional capacity or reboot something, so we can fix it. But if it's really something bigger, we actually need to go back into development and they fix it in a permanent release, put it in the artifact repository and deploy it again. So we have a flow of work, another value stream, fixing a problem, which is typically a larger scale workflow. And another type of workflow is, for example, I have a new feature or a new request for some additional stories, and they put it in the backlogs, developed, tested, and released, and provides additional value. So it's another workflow. So you can imagine, there's another one, somebody wants to request something, I want access to an application that needs to be fulfilled, or I want to add capacity. So in an IT organization, you have different type of these kind of value streams of something is initiated and delivers value. And you can see there are many different type of interconnections there. Now the challenge is that all these workflows need to be run efficiently. And I can assure you, large organizations have this not under control. And just give you an example, monitoring detects a vulnerability. And a security monitor is typically in most organizations a siloed security management system. So they have a vulnerability identifier or a security event. Now it needs to be fixed. You know what happens today? There's no integration with the backlog tool in Jira. They manually copy it, maybe in an incident. Then they create an email and they said, oh, let's put it in the backlog. There's no end-to-end traceability from the actual service vulnerability back to the resolution end-to-end. People have no traceability end-to-end today. People think they have it because people are flexible. They create a spreadsheet, they look at Jira, maybe do some tagging, but actually the end-to-end workflows today are not traceable very well. Even when you close a story in Jira and people say, is it actually in production? They don't know, it's just closed. Is it already deployed in production? It's not clear often, it's just closed. Do people use it? Does it generate value? We don't know either, because we miss the total connectivity and the real end-to-end loops here, which is challenging. So what you get is we need to create those closed loops, and there are different kinds of loops, as you see here. This is basically the continuous exploration. This is where we continuously evaluate our portfolio of services, look at how well are they performing and where do I need to invest in. So typically it's about architecture, your portfolio, and so on. The continuous integration, continuous delivery, that's what we're all doing, and probably most of the people here are involved in, and then continuous operations, where we ensure that our services running are continuously, we can monitor them, automatically fix issues, and if not, we have some feedback loops. And then if you look at how typically DevOps is positioned, is this. DevOps is typically in most organizations, but also if you look at the state of DevOps reports, they typically only touch upon this, the central part, which is important, but it's not a full picture. This shows you typically the traditional DevOps. It's about the designing, developing, testing, deploying, monitoring, yes, security, yes. But somehow we often forget the business. They need to request access to our services. We forget the feedback loop. We don't manage architecture and portfolio very well. We don't have our product administration up to date, and we typically forget how do we integrate risk and compliance into that. So most of the DevOps scope is very limited to a subset of what you need. And that's why it's so important to start with the bigger picture. But as I mentioned, bigger picture is complex, right? That's why you need to start with the bigger picture and then plot it to your own situation and reduce the complexity. Now, let me zoom into this a little bit more detail. So, I agree, this is a scary picture, but it's not that scary, but it looks a little bit like architecture. But actually, these are the building blocks you need in a DevOps organization. So these are the individual building blocks that IT4IT identifies as the building blocks to build a digital management capability. So it includes all the standard DevOps kind of capabilities, but also more. So we have supporting capabilities here, like we need to manage risk and compliance, for example, manage our teams. Team management. Many organizations don't have a solution to manage the teams. In a larger bank, for example, have 300, 400 teams. Do they have a simple register with all the teams linked to the product? Often they don't. So, and it's very important for identity and access management. Have a clear definition of the teams, who's part of the team. Teams are even in multiple places differently defined. You probably think it's not the case, but in reality it is. So you see, it is complex. We have a lot of components, and they need to be integrated. And typically what you need to do yourself is say, okay, how do I support these capabilities? You can plot it to your own tool set, just as an illustration. And you can also try to simplify things. Let's say my portfolio backlog and my product team backlog. Can I use that one tool to do that? In Azure DevOps you could. In Jira you can create portfolios. But typically those solutions don't provide a good business view on your portfolio in the roadmaps. So Azure DevOps and Jira are not very well used by the business for stakeholders to know what's going on. So they typically make a PowerPoint slide to show the roadmap and what they're going for. So apparently our tools still lack in this area. So, but eventually you need to design this and think about how do I connect that. Now, what's also important to realize, if you think about all these building blocks, and let's say the CI/CD pipeline is one of them, where we had the Jenkins, for example, and the GitLab and Azure DevOps, it manages data, because in IT, the data we have in IT is much more important than you think, and we neglect data often. What I mean by that is we don't manage data very efficiently, because if you see, these are all the high-level data entities you have in an IT organization. Like we have our backlog items, stories and features, tasks, we have tests, we have our catalog item, we have the pipeline. Pipeline is a data entity itself, the build and the release pipeline. It can be a YAML file, like in Azure DevOps, but it's actually the data that we have there. And we have build definitions, we have our products, we have architecture, the backlog items, so there's a lot. We have incidents, changes, we manage credentials in our secrets management component, risks, the teams. Now, so this data is very complex, right, by itself. Now, you think you've solved it, but in the reality is that all these tools come with different data models. Now, the real challenge in larger organizations is how do you connect all the data together to get end-to-end traceability and transparency? Because eventually, the data is much more important than the tools that you have out there. Yeah, you need to be able to connect the data. And what I mean by that is connecting to create transparency and traceability, but also know how things are connected. It could be that somebody has a story and there's a code commit and is linked. There is a build and a test and there's a deployment done and an instance, all connected. And if you are able to connect this data, there's a lot of learning and continuous improvement that you can achieve. So having this data in a correct way, that's very important, it's very essential. And just to illustrate that a bit, so here you see the backbone of what are my products and services, how does it support my business, but to show you why do we need traceability and why is that challenging. So somebody has a source code update, like a commit in Git, is linked to a story or a task, it links to a build, but a story is linked typically to a feature, a portfolio, epic, could be a part of a portfolio and demand. It has potentially test cases linked to it and then defects. But once something's deployed, we have a release definition, and once we deploy something, we deploy monitoring as well. And configuration changes, we might get an event out of a monitor, and an event results in an incident, and then there's a problem feedback loop to the problem in a defect, and we got some more security monitoring as well. This is where you see transparency and traceability, is you need to link the data in the different tools. So typically this data in your own organization is spread around 20, 30 different tools. So how do you generate transparency? Somehow you need to be able to standardize this data across the different tools to create this. Right? It's not easy. I'm not saying that it's easy, but you should be able to get this transparency and traceability, because that's a part of the lean and agile way of working. Get this traceability, get the data in order. Okay, so thinking about, I think maybe we need some rest here, because I don't want to shock you too much, but yeah, very important to understand IT management is complex, and we need to create a plan or an architecture to simplify this. So let's have a look at how do you design this end-to-end pipeline. Now, this picture, and you will get this presentation as a handout or as a downloadable document, so you will can read it better, because I understand it's not easy to read in the back. But what this picture shows you is what are the different building blocks, simplified, what are the key integrations. So, for example, my portfolio backlog, my testing, and so on. The reality is, of course, not all integrations are shown here, but IT4IT defines about 30 key integrations. So, and then you can use IT4IT to say, what integration do I miss, and when do I will create those integrations? For example, an integration, when you deploy something in the CI/CD pipeline, can I create an integration with, for example, change management, or update the CMDB, or initiate monitoring? So the key integrations you can use to evaluate, do I have those in my organization as well, and how to select those. The reality is, of course, we have a little bit more components, because typically we have a secret management component, we have maybe usage, we have security code and code quality checks, like SonarQube, for example. But so, and all, again, this picture just shows you the components and integrations, and you need to plot it to your own landscape and make sure that you can select the components and look at what are the integrations. And again, integrations require a good data flow. What kind of data do I have in my IT organization? Yeah, just zooming into this a bit, as I mentioned before, in the strategy to portfolio, which most organizations still lack, so they're not very good at managing the portfolio, having a good product portfolio. And you can call it an application portfolio if you will, but having a good portfolio of services, who owns it, which team is working on it, what are the strategic themes, what is the roadmap, how does the architecture evolve, and also how does my portfolio backlog looks like. And also, what is a key integration that many organizations are lacking today is, if I have my portfolio, let's imagine I create a new application or a new product. One of the first things you need to think about is what kind of risk and compliance is related to this specific application. So basically, it's a simple question as, how critical is this application for my business? What is the impact if the application is down? What data is managed by this application? Is there confidential data in it? So doing this risk assessment and verifying and get your own policies and security generates a lot of non-functional requirements, like the availability requirements, data recovery, about basically the SLAs, but also security requirements. Do we need encryption? Is it externally facing? So this component is basically risk assessment, checking the controls, and make sure that automatically these non-functional requirements are populated in your backlog. Because typically the backlog doesn't contain the non-functionals very well. But they're based on a risk assessment typically. Is it data privacy related? We need to adhere to some policies. Maybe we need encryption and so on and so on. So we automatically populate it in the backlog, and that's where we get traceability again, also for non-functionals like risk and security-related things. Now, this you already know, of course. This is just the traditional CI/CD type components. But what IT for IT is proposing is identify a number of indicators where you can validate, do I have that? Because typically an organization goes through a maturity level. From day one, not every test management, we don't test 100% of all the services. Maybe we have unit testing, security testing, code quality, but maybe functional testing is not integrated. So there is a set of checklists in IT for IT that says, okay, do you have that? Do you automatically deploy monitoring? And so on and so on. Do we automatically deploy infrastructure in the test and production? And maybe there's a few things we cannot handle, so you could say this is not a maturity level for this organization, or database deployment, for example. Now, request to fulfill is typically a different type of thing that people often forget. Well, we have, of course, our default deployment and provisioning tools out there, like an Ansible, maybe VMware, the Azure. But typically that also relates to request management, as I mentioned before, having the ability to request access to services, add capacity. That can be through an API, or it can be through a portal where people request from a standard service catalog. And the DevOps teams, what they need to do, if you have an application delivered in production, typically there are a number of requests that you want to publish to the end users and the business community that they can request for your service. Of course, getting access is always one, but there's more. And you build that and make sure that all these things are automated and not through email that somebody sends you a message to say, can you help me, loading data in your application or something else, right? And then zooming into the detect to correct, which is already a complex area, as I mentioned, because we have monitoring in place, and it's not just one monitoring solution, there's many, and I will zoom into this later in a bit more detail. As I mentioned, the CMDB is never up to date, so typically what the challenge is context. So a lot of monitoring data, so we have a good observability, but we cannot link the data to context. What is the business impact? What is the root cause? Because we miss typically how everything is connected in a landscape, because an application has dependency with other applications. So we are not very well in the context of an application. That's where the service models and discovery fits in. So going back to so now I hope you recognize a bit of these components, which is challenging by itself, but important to zoom into. So one of the things that many organizations are doing as a first step is to look at where is my work managed in the IT organization. Just to look at where are the queues, my backlogs in my IT organization, and preferably have one backlog where all the work is managed. The reality is that many organizations have multiple queues, multiple backlogs in different tools. So typically we have in Jira or an Azure DevOps with our stories and backlogs there. But typically in the service management environment, you have their own backlogs for instant changes. We have maybe events where we need to act upon in our monitoring tools. We have our change request. We had a service request with the request that people have. There's a risks assessment, risk items, vulnerabilities and audit findings. Typically many queues of work in IT organization. And that's an exercise you need to start doing as well, and to say, what are the different type of work in my organization? How do I support that? And where is it maintained? In which system? How do you get end-to-end transparency? And as I mentioned, one of the key things there is having a good product backbone. The product backbone is one of the key things in an IT organization. What do I mean by that again? Is that have all the products identified with a unique name, ID, and a product owner. Know which teams to support it, but also how does a product enable the business? Where is it deployed? In which environment? What version? So it's a kind of a system of record that you need to manage this new digital enterprise. And everything you do is linked to that product. It's the backlogs, it's your build tool, it's your build repository, it's your monitoring, your deployment, your pipeline, your architecture, and they need to use the same tags. So if you log into Jira, Jira typically talks about projects. Azure DevOps talks about projects. Where is my product in all those tools? Typically you choose by saying, a project is or equal to a product, or it's a team, or it's a team of teams. It's a nightmare today, because how you get traceability if this pipeline in Jenkins, to which product does that belong? You get a collection of, the same with the artifact repository. You log in an artifact repository, it has folders and areas and the things. To which product does it belong? And who owns that? Right? So you need unique tagging and products across the entire tool set. And why is that so challenging? One of the reasons is that DevOps often becomes our new silo. What I mean by that is we organize around products, hopefully, not just teams, organize around products, but typically a customer journey end-to-end is dependent on multiple products. So somehow we still have something that is end-to-end, like a customer journey, affecting multiple products. So if we maintain product backlogs in silos and we run from a business perspective in a value stream or a customer journey, you need to be able to correlate that data and understand how they're impacted. Because if there's an issue with performance on a web portal, which team is accountable? Where is it related to? Today, we struggle to identify the root cause. Is it even the network? Is it the database? Is it the application? Is it the front end? Is it the back end? Security, firewall rules, everything. It's a complex, and we need to manage that. So what I want to do now is briefly going through an example scenario of how to integrate, and there's some of the scenarios that IT4IT is providing. So this is an example of DevOps ITSM integration. So for example, we have our backlog in Jira, for example, or Azure DevOps, and we have a tightly integration with test management, CI/CD pipeline. That's all fine. That's typically organized in your organization, hopefully. It's integrated into your deployment tools for infrastructure provisioning, maybe for firewall rules, storage, and of course the application deployment. But hopefully once you deploy something, there's another integration we need, is to make sure that automatically we create a change, we update the CMDB so that we know what version has been deployed out there, where is it running on, and it's a kind of automation that we automatically do that. That's one integration. Another is, once we deploy something, we also want to automatically deploy or update our monitoring environments. Not just the logging, maybe it's synthetic transaction, maybe it's application performance monitoring. Make sure that our logs, metrics, and streaming data is automatically updated so that the new environment can be monitored. And that typically is as simple as if we deploy a new service as well, a new database, we make sure that the monitoring of those components are available, but as well as that they integrate together in a single view so that I know what's my landscape and where does it run. And also I want to start monitoring in test already. So I use the same thing in test because now I use the monitoring tools in production in a test environment. So I start already learning what do I miss. And I run my test cases in my test environment and I run my monitoring. And I do also load testing there, but also I do, like say, chaos tests. And then I try to break the system, and then I see why monitoring didn't pick it up? Because then you see that your monitoring isn't up to date. So you need to start monitoring the same as you do in production in your test environment, and then starting to run those automated test cases and trying to break everything and see, does the monitoring pick it up in the right way? And that's typically lacking. That requires, by the way, a monitoring strategy, right, and a standard. Now, we have a lot of monitoring tools in place, but how does it collect all the data into a single feed of, let's call it a data lake, an AIOps platform, where the monitoring data, the logs, the metrics, the streaming data comes together so that we can analyze this and say, actually, this is the root cause, this is the business impact, and this is the priority. Because we have 10 different monitoring tools out there, or if not more, how to bring it together. And based on that, notify people if there's something wrong, create an incident. And as I mentioned, once an incident is created, maybe I need a feedback loop to my portfolio backlog to make sure that we have a closed loop and that we can resolve problems more faster and frequently. Okay, so how can you apply that in your own organization? So what you can do is take the IT4IT blueprint, DevOps blueprint, with all the building blocks, and starting to analyze your own value streams, plotting your own tools and your current and target, and try to understand how all these tools are currently set up, what data. And it's not enough to say, look, for example, Jira has a project and has issues, has components and releases. Those data entities, somehow you need to identify and say, what does a component in Jira actually means? And how do I integrate all the different tools out there with different data models together? And you need to plot that to your own organization. So that's something you have to do yourself. But selecting the right set of tools is challenging. As you see, this is just a picture illustrating the complexity of the DevOps tool market. And this is a very simplified picture because many, many tools are not even shown here. And that's where we typically lack a good tooling strategy. This is not simple, right? It's a complex landscape, continuously evolving, new tools coming and then also for each technology, for maybe cloud or containers, Kubernetes, for example, continuously evolving. I assume you know this website, the Cloud Native Interaction Landscape, but I recommend you to look at this website. But what they're doing is collect all the key tools in the market to develop cloud-native applications. You probably know this, but it also includes management tools, like for monitoring, logging, continuous delivery. So it doesn't include everything for DevOps, but it's an interesting site to go through, specifically for cloud-native, container development, microservices, and it tries to create a sort of picture of what are the different tools doing. But again, having a tool component is not enough. As we said, we need to be integrated, sharing data and a vision. Now, and that is one of the challenges I see in many organizations. Who owns and governs the end-to-end DevOps toolchain? Which is challenging. And I would say there's not one owner. It's a co-create with all the teams. But it's probably a good idea to say, do we need a kind of center of excellence that actually build this kind of end-to-end toolchain and facilitate all the DevOps teams to do better and faster? So you need a kind of governance model and say, we have so many building blocks in our DevOps chain. Who is looking at these? And who comes with an idea of integration? So who owns this from an engineering perspective? There's integration involved, there's data analysts, there's architect involved, there are the product owners involved. So this ecosystem you need to manage. Typically, this ecosystem consists of about 50 to 100 tools. If you look at the bank, they have 300 different tools to manage IT management tools. So you need to think more cleverly about the governance model, because if everybody select their own tools and their own way of working, that works fine for one team. But if you need to scale it, you're running into an issue. As I mentioned again, because you've got so many different workflows that you need to support and enable. Do it faster, better, cheaper, and more. So you need to be clever about how to integrate it. Now, finalizing this, I would like to say a word of the key takeaways. So I think we realize we need a good digital management capability to manage this new digital environment, right? That's clear. What we also need is a blueprint. And that sounds like architecture, but it's actually a co-create with multiple people and say, how do we run this modern IT organization? Can we create a sort of draft plan about that? And then starting to work, co-create with different teams together. But if you don't have this plan, and you're not on the same page with all people, I can assure you, you will end up in messy landscape, right? We need to focus on the data. If you don't focus on the data you manage in IT, like the requests, the incidents, your changes, your backlogs, your builds, your test cases, your risks, you're running into issue. You need to focus on what is the data I need, because once you know the data, you can also think about the metrics to get transparency and traceability and to continuously improve. You need to create a good backbone, and the backbone I mean is sharing the key data about the products I have, the teams, and how does it generate value. And then I said we need a sort of DevOps governance model and a kind of a set of teams that are doing the DevOps automation engineering, building these standardized frameworks with the different tools, connecting them together with a dedicated center of excellence. Because if every team is doing that on their own, this doesn't make sense. They need to focus on creating business value. They should not change the pipeline continuously. So let's then load our digital enterprise. Yeah? Because eventually, if you do it right, we have a good enterprise. Well, you know, boot failed because typically what we fail is a DevOps reference architecture. Now, so what can we do? There's one option. We say we continue the way we've done it, right? That's the doing ourselves. Or we use the DevOps IT for IT standard and help us and guide us where to start. So you use this reference model, plot your current situation and your target situation and get to more maturity. Of course, you could say, well, I do it myself and reinvent the wheel. Or another option is, yeah, turn off your IT organization or let the teams do it themselves or the business units themselves. Now, if you want more information about IT for IT, there's a website here, opengroup.org, IT for IT. There you can find some more reference materials, download those for your own organization. Also, if you want more information, you can contact me. I can send you the presentation and some more information about this as well. Okay, so hopefully you have learned that improving your DevOps and your digital pipeline, we need to do it differently than we did in the past, by throwing different tools to it, different practices, different data models, because eventually that doesn't add up. This is how we do it today, right? Now, hopefully, if you take a more clever approach, it will be done differently, and something like this, we think about our containers, the infrastructure, our enterprise architecture, the CI/CD pipeline, and neatly connect the dots together. And we don't do it on day one, right? You do it iteratively. Build your complete integrated DevOps tool pipeline. Okay, thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed it. And hopefully you can do something in your own organization. Thank you. Any question? Sorry, yeah?
Very useful. Thank you for your presentation. I have a quick question.
Sure.
Do you have any suggestion about what tool should be used to interconnect different tools?
Yeah.
What was it? Just REST APIs or self-read scripts or whatever?
Well, it's a good question. In the market out there, it's like you're right. Typically, what happens is point-to-point integration, right, with REST APIs. You can use integration platforms like TaskTop. You know that TaskTop is a solution that is an integration tool specifically for the IT management tools. So it looks at the data model of Jira and all the tools, how to connect them. So there are solutions in this space, but you're right. That's still a challenge, creating the connectivity. But there are tools in the market, like TaskTop is an example, or API platforms. But typically, many tools come with some standard APIs already. The challenge is then, how do you integrate, like in ServiceNow as an API for an incident? Jira, you can create an issue through an API. But in reality, the real challenge is data. So I want to create an issue in Jira. I can do that through an API. But I need to know where is the project? Where is the project code? If I have an application, so where is the project? That's one start. So if you don't align our key data model together and have traceability, it's very difficult to integrate them because of these different ways the tools work. It's a problem. Not solved in the industry today. But what IT4IT tries to do is defining at least the key integration. What integration do I need? What data is exposed there? And hopefully the market will pick up and say, okay, let's try to support those integration scenarios better.
Suggesting to have an external database where all of this data should be landed and then connect to all of this business.
Yeah, I don't like to replicate data, right? But what you could do is, if you think about a kind of a data lake kind of solution where key data is logged at least, where you have the traceability. So what you could do, that's happening in the industry as well, like create a sort of DevOps data lake where more the logging is done. So you do a test, you do a build, or you start with a story and you do a code commit, you do the build, the test, it's all logged in a log analytics platform. If you're able to combine it, at least you've got the traceability. That's what's happening a lot. But then you can start but that still is like a sort of replicating logs across it. But that's one way to create transparency. Yeah.
That's probably the common solution for each of these installations.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you do that, but many organizations, if they want a dashboard, like for example, what did we deliver for the business this week, this month? You need, and have traceability. You typically would like to get a sort of data analytics platform beneath this and say, okay, somebody adds a story, there's a code commit, there's a build, there's a test, there's a deployment done, there's monitoring data, and log it into a kind of similar data lake so they can see end-to-end what's happening and where did it, because if an incident in production, now we can trace it back, oh yeah, it has been tested, oh yeah, there was a story. As long as we, at time of, let's say, doing the build, tag it with the right code. Product code or the release ID, have at least something tagged, because otherwise having no tags, tagging becomes the key thing, right? It's the same for cloud. If I deploy something in the cloud, I need to tag it to make sure that this resource belongs to this application or product. Is it production or test? To tagging, have a good tagging strategy for logging is also very important. Yeah, also in the logging itself, of course. Yeah, but who has a good tagging strategy? Well, all right, thanks.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks.